sometimes a picture of a dog would be really helpful. Well, the icon for dog is named, you guessed it, Fang Body. So if you don't know that, then you can't find the dog icon.
Well, on that note, let's start out. We've got September 20th here today, and everyone is here except for Emily. We believe she was abducted by aliens.
Oh no!
They're trying to take her teeth.
She's coming back. They're trying to take her teeth. She'll be back on our next one, or she may come in hot. She may show up. We don't
or
exactly
mouth be
know
like,
what's gonna.
Was she drooping up one side?
I have no idea. I have no idea. Poor M. All right. So today's topic is community resources for intranet owners. So we've done stuff about community resources before, but we're gonna focus a little bit more on intranet owners specifically. And so we're gonna talk about things that there exist for basic configuration, for self-led learning, for power users and configuration examples, for the art of the possible, and for live learning. So let's jump right in and start talking about resources we have out there for basic configuration assistance. And so Mark, you're going to help and lead us through these things, and we're going to start with the intelligent intranet. So can you tell us about that?
I'm a very basic kind of guy.
Intelligent as well.
You got to, every journey starts with the first step, right? So
Yes.
The basic stuff actually does matter. So this is a site that Microsoft has that gives you information about how they view an intranet. What is it about? What are they trying to get us to think about when we're using their tools to build our solutions? So I think there's some great content here that you can use if you're sort of coming at this from a relatively new perspective. You don't have a lot of history writing building an intranet, but also if you're looking for backup to help you convince people of doing it this way is better than doing it that way. There's a lot of information here that you can use to sort of promote the ideas that you're trying to build in your intranet. So lots and lots of thoughts here that tie together all of the technologies that really are part of the whole SharePoint, OneDrive, the larger space that you can build intranets with.
Cool. I like that idea. That could be definitely helpful for getting started. And then one of our favorite people, Sue Hanley, has some governance stuff. Mark, you want to tell us what this is about?
Yeah, so this is a deck that Sue has put together and uses with her clients. So of course, if you want the real special sauce, you get Sue and you get the deck and Sue, which is even better. But what this leads you through is how do you want to think about governance in the context of your organization? And there are a lot of, as it says right here on the title page, there are a lot of questions that you can ask of yourself or of your organization that will help you frame how you want people to be thinking about using these technologies. It's the G word, sure, but it's rules. It's how do you want to set up the technology? Which levers and buttons and stuff do you ask Todd to pull so that you get things set up the way you want them from a security perspective. To me, it's actually got some connections to the concepts behind the Microsoft 365 maturity model. How good do you need to be at this thing versus that thing? And so there's just a wealth of information here, and she's made this available to the public, which is very generous of her. And you could pick and choose. 151 slides is a lot of slides, but there's a lot of different sections and a lot of different pieces of thinking that you can use here.
Yeah, and we're not talking about it to specifically the way we often do the maturity model. I mean, we're going to reference it, but there's 151 things, but it depends on the maturity of your organization as to what of those actually matter to you. And so that's why it's got to be so deep.
Well, and
probably.
and if you're just building an intranet or starting to use these technologies and you're not thinking about governance, you're at the low end of the maturity model when it comes to governance. Just using this deck would put you squarely in the middle even if you just took some tips from it.
Right, exactly. And or art of that sort of, we'll talk about it later, the art of the possible, like knowing they even exist. There's an aspect of that's just that, reviewing it just so that you know about all of these things, not necessarily that you're ready to make a decision. Sorry, Todd, I cut you off.
Oh, that's fine. The phrase governance, I always found confusing, hoity-toity, all that. But if you think about the word govern, it just means control. Like that's all it is. So governance is just a fancy way of controlling things. And like, who doesn't want to have some amount of control over their tenant?
I don't want to be controlled. I want to control. So
well, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
so jump in there.
And that tells you which side of the governance story you want to be on, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Either you make it or it happens to you.
You're
None of my colleagues are at all surprised by that statement.
We are not arguing with you.
So that just seemed like that was a tautology, I think.
Yes, no surprise Pikachu faces here.
Oh, shocking. All right, let's move forward and talk about the SharePoint lookbook, which Mark is going to talk to this, but it tangentially, Derek and I have a lot of experience with this one too. Yep. So go ahead, Mark. Tell us.
I'll talk about it from the basic perspective, and you guys can layer in the wisdom and knowledge perspective.
Yeah.
So the SharePoint lookbook, I think they came out with it, probably at least 5 years ago or something, a long time ago. And the idea was to give people ideas of what they could build with the technology that Microsoft offers. And I've found that it's a really helpful place to send a client when they're like, well, yeah, but what can you even do if they want to do some burrowing on their own before we do something like an art of the possible in person? So it shows you examples of sites that you can build, but I think the most, to me, well, there are two really important things. One is you can install any one of these sites as you see it on the screen in your own tenant. And so not only can you look at it and say, well, that's sort of cool, but you can install it. If you're a global admin for all of these, is that right? You have to be a global admin to install any one of these?
Yep. No, not all of them,
not
but
all
many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so not only can you look at it, you can you can install it, you can play with it, but also each of the lookbook sections, and I just took a screenshot here of 2 of them. There are dozens of them. Shows you like how is the page built, which sections are in the page, how are they laid out, which web parts are here, what combination of web parts make this particular piece of visual, what are the settings for those web parts if you want them to look like that. So it can, in a sense, it's a lot of what we end up doing at Simpraxis is helping people understand, well, if you glue these things together, you can get this kind of a look and you can accomplish this kind of communication, for example. So great ideas there. And then because you can install this stuff, you could even, use them as a starting point and say, well, we want a leadership news site, but we don't quite like it the way it is here. We're gonna get this installed in our tenant, and then we're going to tweak it a bit and make it work better for us. So yeah, it's just goodness all around.
It's sort of like what Todd was talking about with ChatGPT. It's sometimes you want a thing, but you're staring at sort of the blank site instead of the blank page, and you kind of need a place to start. So that's a good way to do that. And Greg in the chat was saying Looksbook's a great resource, and he's put a lot of them in his dev tenant, and that is. Yep. We don't always talk about the dev tenant, but we do a lot. And that is one of the great reasons why, because even, you don't want to just put these in your production org tenant necessarily. Some of them are meant to be, and I'm going to transition and let Derek sort of speak on some of that. But putting them in your dev tenant so that you can review them and sort of get a feel for how they're put together, and then sort of do that in your own production tenant is a really good way to do that. And so then
Derek, these are not the Fab 40 though that You,
Not the
which we're
fast
sort of
forwarding.
an, I mean, if you think about it, sort of an early version of what this is trying to
Absolutely.
accomplish.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
these things actually are, I think they're built right. And
Yeah.
they are.
Derek,
Yeah.
you and Julie know how they work under the covers. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the solutions that you can install from the lookbook, and this is actually the easiest way to do that, is Microsoft Learning Pathways, which we've talked about it many times here before, but it is a micro learning tool that pulls in training and guidance specific to Microsoft products. And then you can then use that to create your own assets and your own training for your organization. And I'm saying that because I work on it, but it is really one of that and the PNP search are the two things that I generally install with all new clients.
Yeah, because it's a real handy solution to help sort of bring the learning in place for people and help with that governance and distribution of that learning across your tenant. And you don't have to use the lookbook to get learning pathways into your tenant. So if you're not a global admin, there's a way to do it manually from the learning pathways site. There's all the instructions there. But the point is that if you want a place to start, all configured with some pages, shows you how to use the web parts, et cetera, that exists. So that is also a great resource. Okay. So last in this sort of basic configuration section is the Flycon.io, which is built by one of our friends in the PNP community, Chris Kent. He built and maintained this. There is a video on the screen, but I know from experience that if I play that video, you will not see it in the recording, so I'm not going to play it. But Mark, do you want to talk about where you can kind of use this? I mean, it's got some really, really cool features about coloring the icons and like selecting them and exporting them, etc. How do you use this?
And me being a basic guy, I'm just going to keep going with that theme. What I do is just go to this site, flycon.io, and I'll search for a word that I'd like to get to an icon with, right? So dog, right? We happen to have a client who has dogs and cats in their business model, maybe we should say. So, sometimes a picture of a dog would be really helpful. Well, the icon for dog is named, you guessed it, Fangbody. So if you don't know that, then you can't find the dog icon. What Chris has done is he's cross-referenced and re-indexed and all kinds of stuff in this site so that if you want to find something, you can find it. So search for dog, you get Fangbody. You can copy that name, Fangbody, no spaces, and you can drop it into a web part like the Quick Links web part, and that's probably the most obvious place that you would use it. You click on icon, change, and then you get a screen that looks a lot like the Flycon screen, but if you type dog into it, you get nothing. So you drop in Fangbody and bang, there's a picture of your dog and you can use it. The other thing that you can do with Flycon though is you can choose colors, you can choose what export format, and so you can build yourself a little library of standalone files based on these icons. And these are, whose icons are these? These are the
Fluent UI ones.
Yeah, the Fluent UI.
Yeah, they're the Microsoft standard, but there's some design package of thing that it comes from. I never remember
the
which
Fluent UI
word.
Yep.
Yeah. And so then you can create your own little sort of library of images that you can use in some of those web parts where you're like in the lookbook where you're combining 2 or 3 web parts into a sort of a section of the page to give it a particular look and feel. So multiple ways you can use this. My favorite way is just to find an icon that looks something like the word that I'm looking for.
Is font awesome what you were trying to think of?
No, but that was what we used to use back in the old days. I was thinking about, Microsoft keeps coming up with these different design languages.
Oh, so it was
they all start with F, and Fluid.
There was Fabric, and then
Fabric.
Yeah.
Fluent.
That way they
All
got
right.
rid of Metro because it didn't start with an F.
Yeah, didn't work
Could
anymore.
be. Yep, could be. All right, so let's delve into some self-led training content. Mark, what about the Microsoft 365 community content? That's a big one.
Well, even better, you can lead yourself through some learning and you can contribute to learning for other people here.
Yeah, you have
So,
both.
yeah, so the Microsoft 365 community content is an effort that Emily and I both work on. No, I don't know if she still does because she's been abducted by aliens, but if they don't take that part of her brain, she'll still work on this. And this is all content in the Microsoft Learn space that's been written by people in the community, like people on this call. And so there's a lot here that I think what I like about it is that it crosses product lines. You know, we don't represent the Microsoft silos. We represent how people really do stuff. And so you'll find that a lot of these articles cross technology stacks and talk about how you can use them together. And some of them are introductory, basics and definitions. I think I've written both of those. This theme is holding up really well, this basics thing. And then some things get into a lot more detail, like there's an article from Liam Cleary here about the 10 things you should do when you first set up your tenant to be secure. So lots of useful information. The Microsoft maturity model for Microsoft 365, you'll see that in the upper right. So that's embedded in here. It's got its own landing page because there's a lot to it. So a lot of things that you can use to think about how other people have accomplished things in the context of building intranets and solutions on top of Microsoft 365.
I think I wrote that group one.
I think you did.
Wait.
All right. How about, I think it's a fairly new area, right? Tech community, corporate communications. I'm not as familiar with this one.
Yeah, I think it's 73 unread posts now for me, or maybe it's because it's unread posts. It's maybe that number doesn't mean anything. So sometimes, I mean, this community is fantastic on many, many different levels. You know, sometimes you can read stuff, sometimes you can watch videos if you choose to. You can, search people's blogs, all sorts of things like that. This is a space in the tech community for people who want to do communication. You know, it's titled corporate communications, but oftentimes that sort of crosses lines within an organization. It could be marketing, it could be corporate comms, it could be, the office of the president. People who are interested in that sort of intranet model of a few people talking to a large number of people. So if you want to ask questions or share your thoughts, this is a great place to go and do it, because sometimes that interaction is even more useful because you don't know quite how to, I'm not quite sure how to form the question because I don't know enough yet, or I've got this particular challenge and I'm wondering if anyone else has had it as well. So this is a good place to go for that kind of dialogue.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to some more power user configuration examples. So this is not the basic out of the box stuff, yeah. Right? So Mark, you're out.
I'm out.
See you later, Mark.
Derek, help us understand what the list formatting is.
So, sort of following our traditional, more like maturity model approach, Mark talked about some of the basic things out there. If you're a little more adventurous, there is a sample repository put out by the Patterns and Praxis team of list formatting. And if you don't know what list formatting is, essentially it's a way to use JSON, which is sort of a structured data, I don't know, it's a structured text file, basically, but you can use that to create conditional logic in either in your columns, your views, or your list forms. And so you can do some pretty neat stuff with that. This particular sample gallery provides, as you can see on the left-hand side, a bunch of different samples that you can use to make rows a certain color based on a certain thing. And they go from sort of the basics, just changing colors of things, all the way up to creating flow chart views, like progress diagrams and stuff like that. I use this a lot when I'm trying to add a little zhuzh to my lists, give a better user experience. The one thing I will say about this, and this is really true with all of the PNP sample galleries, is that they are not necessarily all intended for production use. Some of them are just out there to just sort of show an example of what you can do, but they might require some testing. They definitely require some testing, but might require you to do some like configuration and just editing depending on what your list looks like. But we use this a lot. I use this a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a good it's a good repository, and it's relatively low like concern. Like you're not gonna, if you put it in and it doesn't work and you don't get it right, just take it back out again and you're okay. Like it's not like you're gonna break everything in your environment if you use
low risk and low consequence.
This is not a deployable. So if you're in a organization that has an SDLC, this is content. This is there's a text box on the screen that you paste in your JSON, and that's what it does. So
I also really love the fact that this part of the PNP is run by wizards, because you can ask a question in the issues there and they'll come back to you within a day at most with, oh, sure, of course you can do that. And here's an example. So even if there's not an example, I think they all actually love the challenge, Oh, you want to do that? Let me see. Yeah, here you go. And obviously this is it's all volunteer. It's all you get what you get. But I just think this crew has a lot of fun, and they're very very helpful.
So if it's like asking me a PowerShell question, then there's much squealing and clapping when new ones come in.
I mean, one of the ones I use this for is sometimes if I have a really big form, I want it in 2 columns.
That's a nice one.
I use it for that.
That's a nice
all right,
one.
But moving on, we've got a bunch of other slides and we're running short. We've talked about the PNP modern search web part 100 times on Asks in Praxis. This is one of my, next to Learning Pathways, this is my favorite community-based web part. It is the Swiss Army knife of community tools. You can slice, you can dice, you can search, you can filter, you can Julienne. Here's an example of a policy center that we've created, letting users sort and filter the policies based on department, owner, policies, etc.
Yeah, and if you go back in our Asks in Praxis archive on YouTube, you will find a bunch of sessions on this very topic. So that's a great way to get more on that. Let's move on to the art of the possible. Derek, reference samples.
Yes. So when it comes to extensibility, Julie and I are sort of the resident experts here. But one of the things that we have out there is Microsoft has put out a GitHub repository of reference samples for extensibility. So these include different web parts, different Teams apps, different adaptive card extensions that you can use, and many of them come with instructions and installable package files. So what that means is that you can download their instructions on how to do it in the repository. You can download the file. If you are an admin in your tenant, you can upload that package, or you can upload it to your dev tenant if you're not an admin in your tenant, to test things out, to see what you can do. And this is really the art of the possible. This is an example of a room reservation app that Julie and I built with Stefan Bauer. And it just shows how you can build an app that would help you reserve, like admins reserve executive level conference rooms or something like that. And so you can see here, it lets you see all the meetings, the meeting rooms that are available. We've got schemas that are available for those rooms. There's also ways to get the maps, like get a map to the location and plan your trip. And this just helps show your boss or your boss's boss what it is that you can do with Microsoft 365. 3 apps that are out there. We have a room reservation app, a team calendaring app, and there's also an integrated dashboard app that Paolo put out there as well. So with very little lift, again, jumping up on the maturity model, you can get to see some of the stuff that you can do with just a little bit of extensibility.
Yeah, and on that note, adaptive card gallery, same kind of idea, right?
Yes. So the adaptive cards are used on the Viva Connections dashboard, and this is for both the mobile and the browser experience. And in the Microsoft Store, there is the adaptive card design gallery, which we created. It's 14 ready-to-use demo adaptive card extensions, and you can install them in a dev tenant, roll them out, put them on a dashboard, and you can see them both in the browser or mobile. A couple of examples of what's out there are the event registration, showing an event calendar and a form that lets you submit your registration to an event, how to push up some company news, as well as create a company holiday list. And you can also, there are some examples on how to use geolocation. So if you have a lot of mobile workers that are using their phone, there's some ways that you can use geolocation to get directions or, stuff like that. And these are the images here are just two examples of what we've got going on there.
Yeah, and there's a full link to the visualization of all of them that you can see at that link. So
and install it in your tenant.
And
that
just
too.
Since the title of this is for intranet owners, I mean, I think with some of these higher tech, maybe higher maturity things, I mean, I think the important thing is to know that this kind of thing is possible. And maybe then you're talking to some of your developers, or you're not necessarily going to build these things yourself, but you can go as far as you need to go is the point. I mean, when people say, can we do this? Usually these days, the answer is yes. It's just, well, how do we do it? What's the tool?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. Absolutely.
Exactly. So Learn Live resources. So the PnP community has a bunch of phone calls, or Teams calls, excuse me, that happen every week. Some happen bi-weekly and they fall on a cadence, but essentially there is a list at the PnP GitHub.io hashtag community that shows all the calls with a link to the calendar, so that you can put it in your own calendar, or just to join the call live. The link is right there. And then also a link to the YouTube videos for that particular call. And so there's ones that are Microsoft speakers primarily. There's the one on Viva Connections and SharePoint Framework. There's Power Platform specific ones, and one on Office add-ins as well. And then in addition to those regular calls is the Sharing is Caring group, which is a separate initiative where, like, the maturity model practitioners call is, and etc. So you can go to that Sharing is Caring, and they schedule interactive conversations. They're usually not recorded. They're meant to be very open, safe spaces where you can just go get information and not feel like, you're going to be judged because you'll be on a recording. So that Sharing is Caring link can get you a lot of sort of live ways to interact with people and learn as you go. In addition to that is the in-person events, and sometimes remote, but generally they're starting to come back to the in-person. So the Community Days site, communitydays.org and collabdays.org, sort of surface all the community-led events that are happening in local areas. And so these two websites, Community Days tends to be more of the US and North America, and Collab Days tends to be more of the European contingent, but there is crossover in both ways. So absolutely should check those out for events happening in areas where you are or where you might want to be, like maybe joining us at Collab Days New England if you are interested. We are having that one in October, on October 21st. It's a free event. I'd like to point out that these free events are just the same quality. They have the same speakers that you can see at some of the big paid Microsoft events or other events run by other organizations. Same speakers, some of the same content. You can get that all for free and have that networking and small group experience that you might want. Similarly, maybe you want to go to Miami in February. Maybe that's something that sounds great to you, and you could sort of back on a day or or two and make it a vacation. So Microsoft 365 Community Day is Miami. That's happening. Our very own Emily Mancini was running it, but now she's abducted by aliens.
She's been
so who
abducted
the
by
heck
aliens.
Hopefully the
who the-
aliens will give her a break and let her come back for a
maybe
couple
come
days.
back for that day.
Yeah.
So that would be good. Yeah. So the Community Day is Miami is happening as well. Here's a list of all the resources from today's call. There is a lot of them. We have reached the end of our time. So let me just come back and say our October 4th session, we've decided to do an Ask and Praxis Anything. We've gotten a few questions that are sort of one-off answers. They're not big enough to make a whole session, but we could address them. So absolutely use that link for the form, the simpinfo/Ask and Praxis, and submit any of your other questions that you might have that you'd like us to address on our next session. And
Like,
we will,
did Emily come back?
right, like,
She
did
has
Emily,
all
well,
her-
if you
all of
show
her
up, we'll
teeth.
know, right? Because we'll say, yeah. And again, registration's open for Collab Days New England, and Derek and I will be at 365 EduCon in Chicago right after that. So if you are interested, join us there. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We were happy to have you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye,
See ya.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.